Okay, we're going to talk about unit rates. And to really understand what unit rates are, is we have to really understand what the two things being compared. So a lot of times with unit rates, we'll compare things like time and distance. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to find some number. So we'll call it x as a variable in reference to 1 if we were to make it a fraction. Okay? And this is very similar to what we call slope. It's very similar to it. It's not quite the same, okay, but it's similar to what slope is, where we're doing whatever our y over our x variable. Okay, I know I drew an x there. Maybe I should call this a. It's a little confusing. But anyways, what we're trying to do is we need to figure out what is the independent variable and what the dependent variable is in our relationship. So I've given an example. Let's say I'm running, okay, and I run for a certain amount of time. Okay, time is my independent variable. Okay, versus my distance. My distance depends on how long I decide to run for. Okay, so okay, good. If I decide to run for 1 hour, maybe I go 5 kilometers. Okay, if I run for 2 hours, I go 10 kilometers. It's not the other way around. My running doesn't affect time. Okay, I'm not that fast that I affect time. So once we figure out what our independent variable is, our independent variable is always the x-axis, okay? While our dependent variable always goes on the y-axis. So if we were to graph something, and this is why I say it's similar to slope, because time is independent, that would go on our x-axis, so that'd be our time, okay? And on our y-axis, we'd have the distance we ran, the distance running. Okay? And they'll give us some point. They'll say you ran 10 kilometers in 2 hours or something like that. So the point you would draw, because it's 2 hours, well, that would be our x, and the distance we ran was 10. So our coordinate would be 2, 10, if we were to put it out. We assume this relationship is a straight line for unit rate. Okay? And what we're trying to figure out is how far they would have ran in 1 hour. Okay? So our x, we're always trying to equal our x to the number 1 in this case. Okay, so in 1 hour, we can kind of figure this out intuitively. That would just be half as long as 2, so half as far would be 5. Okay, but let's say we have more difficult type questions. Let's say you're traveling in a car and you travel 348 kilometers in 4 hours, and we want to find out what your unit rate is. Okay, first we have to figure out which is independent and which is dependent. Which do you think is our independent variable in this case? Do you think it's the kilometers or the hours?
Our independent?
Yeah, our independent.
Is the hours?
Is the hours, yeah. Our hours is independent. It deals with time, and time is pretty much always independent, okay? And then how far we travel depends on how long we travel for. So the 348 depends on the 4 hours. So that makes this the x and this the y. Okay? So if we're to build this relationship, you okay? If we're to build this relationship, let's say we were to put a coordinate out. It's at 4 and 348. Okay, so that's 4, 348. Okay. So our coordinates at 4 and 348, and the goal here is to figure out what 1 would be, right? And again, we assume this relationship is linear. So we always set this up as a fraction, and that's where it kind of reminds us of slope. When you do slope, and I'm not sure if you've gotten to slope yet, but you always put the y, the rise, over the run. So that's the y, that's up and down. I guess I should put it in red here. It's our y. Our up and down over our left and right. Okay, it's called rise over run. So in this case, we're going to put our dependent, because y is our dependent. We'll put our 348. Okay, so I'll put that in red, 348, and we're going to divide it by our x value, and our x value, I should have put that in blue here, is 4 hours. Okay? And this is how we find unit rate. We don't have to do all this graphing with lines and stuff, but I'm trying to give you an idea so that you're going to link it to linear relationships later. Okay? When you divide, essentially what you're going to be doing here is, I want you to think of it like this. You're going to be dividing both the top and the bottom of this fraction by the number 4. Well, what happens when you divide 4 by 4? What will be on the bottom of this fraction? 1, okay? So really, when you go into your calculator, all you type in is 348 divided by 4. But think of it like we're reducing the entire fraction. We're putting it all over 1. Okay? So when we take out our calculator, we only have to do 1, because we know 4 divided by 4 is going to be 1. We now divide 348 divided by 4. You want to take the calculator out? I think I have one here too. Yeah, so
87.
87. Okay? So we get 87 over 1. But what are our units here? It's a good thing we color-coded it. What are the units with this? 87 what?
Kilometers.
Kilometers. And what was our unit rate?
Oh, hour.
Hours. So it's 87 kilometers per hour. And that's how we set that idea up. Okay? Now let's say we have our second relationship here. In our second relationship, I have hours worked and I have the amount of money we earned. Which do you think is the independent variable?
Independent is the 8.5 hour.
The 8.5 hours, that's right. Because depending on how many hours I work, my pay changes. So that means my pay is my dependent. Now, instead of doing all this grafting, we can set this up really quickly. We know we put our independent, or our y, over our x. So y divided by our x, okay, is equal to, and which one's our y? What's the number?
78.
Yeah, 78.
Decimal.
20, good. So $78.20 divided by what?
8.5.
8.5 hours. Okay, and this is all we really need to do. I did all that extra stuff up here to give us an idea, but this is all the real work we have to do, is put our dependent over our independent and then simply divide the values. Okay, so we just take the top number and divide it by the bottom. Remember, what it's doing is creating a fraction over 1. Okay, and we know our independent is hours, so I can already write 1 hour. And let's take our calculator out and figure that out. Where did the calculator go?
Divided by 8.5.
Yeah, divide.
9.2.
That's right, 9.2. So 9.2 what? Dollars. So they're earning $9.2 per hour. That's right. So if they told you to write this as like a unit rate, they might say 78 kilometers, and they go like this.
Per hour.
Oh, I wrote the word per in, but per hour. That's right. That's what the division's there for, per hour. And in this case, they write $9.20 per hour.
Wow.
Okay, that's unit rate.